Welcome to our Montana. I'm Mike Penfold, your program host. You know, our organization has done a lot of work on the Yellowstone River in the last 25 years. It's been that long. And what you realize, the more you work with the Yellowstone River, what a valuable resource it is for all of us. For one thing, it's an economic background for so much. Our agriculture, our mineral industry, all of our communities along the Yellowstone River. It's just such a valuable resource. But this river is under threat, and it's under threat from a lot of different things. And this program today is going to be focusing on one of the more serious threats that we believe is facing this Yellowstone River. And it's one that you might not really understand or really not know much about. But what we've got going on the Yellowstone River is an explosion in slow motion of invasive species of plants and animals. Right below me here is a whole batch of Russian olives, and we're going to talk more about that and some of these other invasives that we must figure out how to get on top of, how to get under control. So I hope you'll find this program interesting. Here are some kids having a wonderful time paddling around Lake Josephine in Riverfront Park. Look behind them though. Those light green trees that you see there are Russian olives, gradually taking over the lakeshore. Here is a beautiful picnic area at Riverfront Park. The lawns are mowed, but look across the lake. See, the Russian olives are beginning to take over that part of our park. In this program, I'm going to focus on the Yellowstone River, but it's important for you to recognize that every one of our amazing rivers in this state are threatened by these invasive species.
Invasive species are a growing problem here in Montana, especially in our riparian environments along our waterways. The Yellowstone River means a lot to us all. These invasive species cause concern because the way they are able to grow and develop and reproduce quickly. They also don't have natural predators. Along with their adaptations, they're able to thrive in a variety of different environments, especially if left untreated. Removal and eradication of these species can be time-consuming and be very expensive. So identify and act quickly is very, very important. Early detection and rapid response gives us our best chance at combating and keeping these invasive species in check.
So here we are on the banks of the Yellowstone River. Right over here you see some of the cottonwoods. It's a native vegetation here. It's a part of the riparian ecosystem. We have some other native species here. This is golden currant. We have silver buffaloberry right over there with the fronds on it. We have western snowberry. But we also have mixed in here quite a few invasive species, Russian olive among others. And what's going to happen over time if we have too many invasive species? The Russian olive is one example. We're going to talk later about another one, buckthorn, which is even a more serious problem. And what they will do is occupy the entire site. They won't allow light to come to the ground. The cottonwood seedlings, when they come down, will have nowhere to land, nowhere to access light. And eventually the cottonwoods will phase out. They will reach their maximum age, about 100 years. They'll die, and they will not have a replacement for them. There won't be a crop of younger cottonwoods like you have right here to replace them. And this iconic ecosystem, the riparian ecosystem, the cottonwood ecosystem along the Yellowstone River, will eventually fade away in favor of a shrub layer of invasive species, some of which are highly adverse to wildlife and totally change the habitat for wildlife in this area. And it just changed the entire sense we have of the Yellowstone River as it is with the, in my opinion, beautiful cottonwood forests that are typical alongside them.
Over the past few years, one of the growing concerns for myself in Yellowstone County is the amount of poison hemlock showing up along our waterways and in our coulees. Right here along the Yellowstone River at Blue Creek Fishing Access, we have an invasion on the rise. These are last year's stock. This plant is called poison hemlock. It is a relative or family of the carrot. It's a biannual, so it lives 2 years. In its first year, it kind of carpets the ground with little 2 or 3 inch sprouts. And then in its second year, it grows up tall and it grows these white flowers. This plant is a huge concern because, yes, it has no natural predators, and it has a long taproot where it consumes a lot of groundwater, and it also has a prolific seed production rate. Poison hemlock, believe it or not, it's actually all within this grass behind me, and by next year, this entire little area will be completely covered in poison hemlock stalks. That limits resources for the nice snowberries we have in the area, but I'm guessing by next year this area will be completely littered by poison hemlock. Poison hemlock is called poison hemlock for its name. You can smell it, and it causes some allergy problems. All parts are poisonous. The stalks can remain poisonous for up to 2 years. The seeds are the most poisonous part. It can be sensitive and cause problems to the touch, but the bigger problems come when we're actually ingesting it. Controlling poison hemlock can be very difficult because it does have a long taproot and not an extensive rhizome in its root system. You can pull and leave it there. The problem is you have to have the proper protective equipment, and oftentimes it's just too dangerous to get that close. So most frequently we find ourselves using herbicide and applications for treatment of this plant. Some places around the country there is a biocontrol. However, I do not believe it is abundant or approved here in Montana, but I do know that a biocontrol bug has been researched and has been taken from its native land, brought over here as well, but it's not available for us here in Montana at this time.
All right, so here we are in Riverfront Park, and as you can see, it's really different from where we were. It's really dense, it's shady under here. We're under a solid canopy of buckthorn. There's almost no biodiversity. Almost the only thing left in here is buckthorn, except for a few cottonwoods from before the buckthorn got established, and the one apple tree that we came across just a little while ago. You can see how thick this is. It makes it a real problem to clear it out. The best way to get rid of it is to cut it off at the base and then put an herbicide on the base. Once you've cut down 2 or 3 of these, the rest of them don't have anywhere to fall. There's prickles on it, there's thorns on it. It's just a really, really hard job to get this done. You need a lot of coordination. You need to be piling your wood or piling it or something like that. And it's just a real challenge to get rid of this stuff. And then, I don't know if you can see the floor here, the forest floor, but it's solid green, or pretty green. Some places it's solid green. All the young sprouts that we have, there's one right here. Just everywhere you look, there's buckthorn. Buckthorn can grow in pure sun, open fields, but it can also grow in dense, dense shade, and it's the only thing out here that's left. And if we take out the overstory, these come up. So it's just a continual problem. It's a very challenging invasive species to get rid of, and it's very damaging. As you can see, there's no way that a cottonwood seed could land here and grow. So once these cottonwood trees are old and fall over, what we're going to have is nothing left but buckthorn. We're here in the middle of what is basically a buckthorn forest here. All around us we have buckthorn trees. I was walking along the trail one day and saw a flash of white flowers. It turns out that this tree is an apple tree. We think it's an old orchard tree, or it was an escaped domestic apple, but it really stands out in this forest because it's almost completely taken over by buckthorn. If you notice the ground around here, in contrast to where we were earlier today, there's almost no vegetation. What you do see, a few stubs of green, that's all buckthorn. It can grow in the shade, it can grow in the sun. It's if we take out the overstory, the buckthorn would be coming back. So it's really kind of an anomaly to find an interesting tree like this out here in the middle of this forest. It's hung on, completely surrounded on all sides, but here for the wildlife, and we're really interested to find out more about its history. It could well be from an orchard, it could be a heritage apple, and we're aiming to do some research on it and find out what exactly it is. So it seems like since I've been working with you, we've just been able to connect to more and more people. We've done the invasive species workshops that you've organized, and we've just worked with a lot of different people. I've been working with the Montana Audubon Center, Rocky Mountain College, MSU Billings, I know the BLM. We've been able to connect to all these different people.
Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, they're great to work with as well.
Yeah, and it seemed like there wasn't a lot of awareness about buckthorn, but between our efforts and just getting to know these people, working with them on different projects, not just the invasive species, the word has really gotten out. Our Arbor Day event has been a great thing. There's been
I like the new Arbor Day, you know, the volunteers coming out and doing some of the work, and then in the spring I think we're having all the kids back for a traditional Arbor Day where we all...
In the fall.
In the fall, and so
we'll
the spring we had the groups come in and...
Projects, yeah, lots of projects.
At North Park?
Planted 15 trees at North Park, yeah. And yeah, we're just connecting with all those people, all those volunteers. That's
and able
really...
to talk about the problems and why we're doing this, because if we don't replant and re-veg, we're going to have more invasives. So
yeah. So what do you think is going to happen long term if we don't control the vegetation along here? What do you think this forest would look like in 20 years if we?
It's one of my least favorite words. I'm a big fan of biodiversity. I like lots of living things living in an area. I love spending time outside. I like photographing wildlife. I enjoy fishing. I enjoy hiking and biking. And even looking around here, we've got poison hemlock. We've got Russian olives. Two very dangerous plants to have. The thorns on Russian olives are extreme. Poison hemlock, it's poisonous. You'd smell it. If ingested, it can really cause problems. I see monocultures, just these specific plants growing. I see less and less natives, desired plants here, and I know we do a lot, and I think we have a great thing going, but we're going to need a lot more people involved in order to keep the desires and what we have invasive free.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially on the other side of the river where we have all the buckthorn. It is coming in so thick. It's a totally unnatural habitat. There is no mid-level shrub level. It goes up to about 20 feet tall. It's absolutely dense on the forest floor. There's nothing under it except other buckthorn. And over time, what would happen is the cottonwood trees, they last about 100 years. They'll senesce and they'll die. They'll fall over. Beavers take out a lot of them. And there's no way that a cottonwood tree can grow in that kind of environment with all that dense shade. So over time, we will lose the entire cottonwood forest.
And if we lose cottonwoods, I think we lose more than just cottonwoods. Isn't that going to affect our beaver population?
So we'll lose our beavers, we'll lose the cicadas, which are kind of making an iconic sound for if you've ever been down here in the summer. And unfortunately, they won't make the mosquitoes go away. But other than that. But no, it would change this river system so much. We'd have this mid-level shrub layer that's totally different. All the native plants that we have, there's a really long, complicated history of people's interaction with the native species in this area. They use them for, I mean, it's their hardware store, their grocery store, and their medicine cabinet, and all in one, their pharmacy. And so.
And if we have all these invasives taking over and limited.
Right, yeah. Some of them may have some alternative uses, but we don't know what those are, and it's totally different. It'll change the wildlife flow, it'll change the way the ecosystem
Okay,
works.
some of the plants that I've learned about, purple loosestrife and some other invasive clams and mussels that I learned at Invasive Species in Riverfront Park last week, they can actually clog waterways. They can burn up boat motors. Some of these invasives outside of my plant world, working with others and learning about their invasive focuses, there could be some real repercussions down the road. I'm guessing time and money and resources.
Commitment will help change that, but otherwise it's going to change the way we see things, it's going to change the way we play, the way we recreate, and it's just going to change how we think about this entire area. It's going to be a whole different thing if we let it all turn to invasives. I think we have one area that we cleared. We spent some time 2 years ago now clearing out an area. It's about an acre in size. We were experimenting with different ways of getting rid of it. We did try to cut it all, pile it, and burn it. It's pretty time consuming. We're looking to see if there's other ways we can do it. We're thinking of coming ahead of time and clear out some of the smaller ones, and then come back later and do the fall. It'll open up more gradually, and we can more efficiently get buckthorn out. But we really need to start learning different methods, and that was the first thing. It's essentially a clear cut at this point. We are revegetating it. There are some native species coming back in. I was surprised how many actually, because it was solid buckthorn in the overstory, just as thick as you could imagine. And it actually, some of the native species have held in there and are coming back. We're getting some rose and chokecherry and a few others like that. We're also planting some native plants in there, and so we're revegetating it that way. We will eventually have a project going in where we'll pull up all the understories ones that are coming up. Again, these guys. There's some bigger ones, so it'll take some shovel. We really need volunteers to help us with that. And we plan to make that eventually native habitat and then expand from there. And we have a long way to go, but we're excited to get started. This area was kind of neglected for a long time. It wasn't really anybody's job to take care of the buckthorn. We're working more and more with natural areas now, and one of the main things that we do is work with invasive plants, and that's one of our major focuses in these areas.
I want to show you what we would like to see. Here's a nice scene at Norm's Island, and this little buck can find plenty to eat here. Look at the nice cottonwood revegetation coming and the variety of plants.
This is kind of what we like to see happening. See this old cottonwood tree here? Lots of good grass, native plants coming up. Here's a new little cottonwood coming up. In a few years this guy will be gone, but we do have new trees coming up. Here at Riverfront Park, you see a whole variety of good things happening. New cottonwoods coming on, old ones dying, creating habitat for all the birds and animals. This is a healthy ecosystem here. You don't see any Russian olive here. And that's because Yellowstone River Parks Association has spent a lot of time cutting the Russian olive out here, keeping this ecosystem intact. This is the way we like to see it along the Yellowstone River. Here's what we like to see along the Yellowstone River. Nice young cottonwoods coming up. A lot of dead wood on the forest floor to create habitat for animals. Lots of native grasses coming up. Place for birds to nest. Now looking down an old flood channel when the Yellowstone River flooded, maybe 30, 40 years ago. And it helped plant all these cottonwoods along the way. So the Yellowstone River flooding is really an important feature of this free-flowing river. And the cottonwoods that come with it are such a critical element. An important thing that cottonwoods do for this river is they die and they fall into it. The biologists call it woody debris. Here's an example right over here. That wood stacks up and behind it creates a new island, and also maybe a side channel of lower flows that the small fish can get into. So cottonwoods falling into the river are an important function of cottonwoods and the ecological system of this river. If we lose those cottonwoods over the next decades, we've lost a lot of the important parts of what makes this river function so wonderfully. Here's a lot of woody debris creating a sandbar, catching all this rock, creating a new habitat here. And right behind here are some visitors for the summer. These pelicans are expert fishermen. They're resting there and fishing there because they know there's good fishing in this river. It's a healthy river, and they get it.
This is a side channel of the Yellowstone River that goes around Norm's Island. We have plenty of willows that are growing here naturally, and that makes habitat for the beaver and also makes building materials for dams. The dam itself creates a good environment. Note the silt that's stacked up behind this beaver dam. Here is a good looking piece of riparian area. Notice the willows in the background. If this riverbank was crowded out by non-invasive species, the willows would not be there. Note also in this picture the beaver slide there, or the beaver trail, where beaver had been cutting willows to build their dam and make their houses in the background there. This was a recent project to cut down Russian olives at the new Blue Creek fishing access site. Volunteers such as the smoke jumpers, floaters, Yellowstone River Parks Association, and others came together to control and cut down a bunch of these Russian olives. We Montanans face a huge amount of work if we're going to stop these invaders from taking over our rivers and landscapes. It's going to take cooperation from landowners, federal, state, and local government, and ourselves. We need to volunteer and help wherever we possibly can.
So how do you get volunteers for projects, or do you work with volunteers very much?
Unfortunately, we don't do too much work with volunteers, but the door is always open for weed pulls and plant identification. My focus is kind of teaching awareness of noxious weeds, and don't be fooled, because oftentimes, boy, they're pretty, but let's not be vectors and be spreading them. But how about yourself?
We actually, at the Parks and Recreation Department in Billings here, we have an outreach coordinator, so you can call him. He loves to organize projects. I work closely with him. The other thing is, if anybody's got an idea about how to help us with invasive weeds, just call me. I love to talk to people. I love to talk to them about their ideas, and sometimes we can make those ideas work out. So just call me, call our outreach coordinator. And then I also work with other groups. The Montana Audubon Center sometimes has volunteers. So there's other ways, other places we can look to find volunteers. I know at the Montana Zoo, they actually have a lot of buckthorn, and I know that they have volunteers come in all the time and help them with things. So there's lots of different ways you can plug in, but I'd start with our outreach coordinator.
One of my favorite aspects of working for the Weed District and working with others is the outreach education part. Teaching others about stewardship and leaving the land better than we found it. It's a great time going out into schools, teaching the kids plant identification and how seeds travel and how these plants got here and what to be on the lookout for. I also enjoy getting to go out and talk to landowners, talking about integrated weed management tools and what would work best in their scenarios. I've even been to a few homeowners association meetings talking about specific weeds within the homeowners areas. The outreach education part and working with others has been a real treat.
You've organized the invasive species workshop, and it's becoming an annual event.
Yeah, that's kind of fun. I taught junior high for many years here in Montana, and I miss it, so I kind of focus on 7th grade. I also feel like it's because they're great to work with, as well as they're starting to find their independence, and if I can instill the weed awareness at an early age, maybe I'll be successful. Invasive Species in Riverfront Park is a great event. Some of the schools that I get to spend 2 or 3 times or continued projects throughout the year with, we celebrate by inviting many different organizations, and they teach about their invasive species cause. And by the end of the day, I feel like kids have an awareness and a different appreciation for their surrounding. They start at Riverfront Park, you see a beautiful park, you see all this vegetation and wildlife, and by the end of the day, they can tell you that there's really not too many species here. And by the end of the day, they can name 5, 10 different invasive species that they thought was a great biodiverse area. So their awareness is able to increase just like that.
Yep. It's all green, but some are good and some are not ones you want here. So.
They're everywhere. Back in here, there's a bunch of salt cedar.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
All of that down there is salt cedar.
Oh yeah.
That I wiped
Wow.
out. Right over there is the biggest salt cedar I've ever killed.
Oh my gosh.
Scotch
Good job on
thistle,
this.
baby
Whoa.
spurge.